Welcome back to the Wizard Shop. We've got this 2002 Chevy Avalanche in here today for service, and it just kind of brings to mind that there's a lot of these on the road with this engine in it, literally millions of them. There's Sierras, Yukons, Suburbans, Escalades. I mean, the list goes on. The 4.8, the 5.3, and the 6-liter LS series of truck engines. I'd like to go over some of the common issues that I've had to repair over the years over and over and over again. The same problems. So this can help you if you're in the market for a vehicle, what to expect, or if you currently own the vehicle, what to expect on repairs on one of these vehicles. So this is a common sight on any Escalade, Yukon, Suburban, Sierra, Silverado, some Trailblazers. Impalas even have this motor in them. This is a 5.3 motor, and like I said, they use these in millions of vehicles. One of the first common issues I'm going to go over on these is intake gaskets. You go to start the vehicle in the morning, it runs really rough, misfires, and as soon as the engine warms up, that goes away. 99% of the time is intake gaskets. I've probably replaced literally 150 sets of them. So the intake has to come off. It's a fairly easy job. They just unclip off the intake, you clip new ones on, bolt it back together. It's a very simple job. No coolant is spilled anywhere, it's dry. So,
Hi Wizard, how much does that repair usually cost?
A couple $100. It's not very expensive. It doesn't take very much time. I can have the intake off in 15 or 20 minutes. I can have the whole job done in an hour or less. So that's common problem number one. Another common problem on these where the intake also has to come off is the NOx sensors. And as you see in the picture, the intake has to come off, and it's a good time if you haven't changed the intake gaskets to go ahead and do so, because that's also a common problem. But typically water gets in there and gets into the little wells that the NOx sensors hide inside there. You replace them with a new wiring harness, and then usually you silicone the little cap back on. And there's little foam, little bricks kind of that go under the intake. I typically throw those in the trash because all that does is hold water and allows it to seep down into the NOx sensors. Take it to your parts store and they check the codes, and it says NOx sensor 1 or 2, or you can go ahead and put your money down that your NOx sensors need to be replaced. The intake has to come off. And that job typically $250, $300, somewhere around in there. It's not super expensive, but you know, that's what that common issue number two is. So the third common issue on these, on the side of the motor, down here, right above the oil filter, there's a little, it's either an oil cooler line block or a little block off plate. There's two 10mm bolts that go in. Those typically leak oil down the side of the motor, and it's easy to think someone who's inexperienced, so they've got a rear main seal leaking or something bad happening. But I've seen those leak over and over again. It's just two bolts and a little gasket, and like I said, it sits right above the oil filter. Trace it up to there, and it's usually the problem there. That's problem number 3. Problem number 4. This one's a little bit more involved. You get an issue on these that get age on the engine. They got low oil pressure, and you think it's disastrous or something big is gone bad, but the truth is there's a little O-ring right in front of the motor on the oil pickup tube, right where it mounts into the oil pump. There's one bolt that holds that on, the tube to the pump, and the O-ring gets flat and it starts sucking air, and you get low oil pressure. You have to take the timing cover off and drop the oil pan a little bit to get down and get that replaced. It's a lot more involved, but it's a common issue on vehicles that have higher mileage. It's just an upgraded O-ring, and you put it back together, and typically it takes care of that problem. So the next common problem on these is that you're going down the road, your air conditioning's blowing ice cold, and all of a sudden it goes warm. You think something disastrous has happened, and in some cases maybe so, but most of the time not on these. What happens is there's a very small serpentine belt run off the main pulley to the AC compressor that's separate from the main serpentine belt. It has a tiny little tensioner, and typically the tensioner goes bad, it locks up, it throws the belt off, You just put a new tensioner and a new serpentine belt in your back-end business. It's not very expensive. You're probably looking at $125 in a shop to get that done. If your AC quits on you have one of these vehicles, take a look at that. Very likely it could be your problem. So problem number 6 is you're at the gas station, you're trying to fill up and it keeps stopping on you. You relock the trigger and it stops again, and you say, what in the world's going on here? The common problem on these is General Motors put the evap vent right over here on the rear of the gas tank, where dust and dirt and everything gets blown all around and ends up plugging and destroying the vent solenoid, or either plugging the vent itself. Sometimes the canister also gets destroyed. It gets plugged up with dirt. I've probably replaced myself 100 of these or more. It's a common problem, and it may be where you get a check engine light and it tells you there's a problem before you get to this point where it's locking up on you. But many times I get a phone call, hey, I can't fill up my gas tank, it keeps clicking off on me. I already know what's wrong if it's one of these vehicles. It's the vent solenoid or the vent. So that's number 6. Okay, problem number 7 is the gauge cluster. So many of these have where the tachometer, speedometer, or the fuel gauge is all out of whack, and it just completely, it's reading readings that are completely unfathomable, like 10,000 RPMs or something crazy. And what's wrong is the little stepper motors in there go bad. Typically what you have to do is pull the cluster out, send it off to people, there's services out there, they rebuild them, they send them back, and you put it back in. I think it's typically $300, $350 to get that done. Most of that is the rebuild service, but it's not a hard job. It's easy to get that out. But if your gauges are all out of whack, it's usually not a sensor, it's not your computer, it's the cluster needs to be sent off and be rebuilt 99% of the time. I've probably sent off 60 of these or more, so a lot of them. Problem number 8 is also on the cluster. You go driving down the road, everything's fine and happy, and then your ABS and your brake light come on at the same time. That happens over and over on these. What it is the ABS control module. Typically, it sits right under the driver's seat on the frame, and you have to take it apart. I can rebuild these myself in-house. I take it apart and resolder the power connections and the ground connections on the circuit board. I've repaired a lot of these, but maybe your mechanic may have to send it off and get it done, or maybe just replace it altogether. I can repair them in-house, and then that issue with the lights coming on when you're driving down the road is gone. Okay, I have one more common issue I'm going to tell you that I've experienced on these vehicles. It's actually kind of a combo. There's a ground wire that sits directly under the driver's seat on the frame. That gets corroded, and that causes gauges to act funny, or lighting and things in the dash to act crazy. It's just a ground wire. It sits right on the frame, right under the driver's seat. There's just a small little ground strap. That's a common problem. And while you're in that area, you will see another common issue is the exhaust manifolds, where they bolt to the engine. The bolts break off with age, and it's always the back ones, always the ones that are hardest to get to. You typically have to take off the manifold and take the wheel liner out and get in there to drill those out. I've drilled out numerous bolts for that. The labor on the removal of the manifold plus an hour per bolt. Unless it's really, some of them come out by hand and you get lucky, it'll be cheaper, but usually it's drill them out. So I found a lot of issues with these cars and this engine that you could expect to have to fix at some point. But the truth is, they're really a good engine. I recommend them personally over any other brand as far as ease of maintenance and cost of parts, and really they don't have any serious issues other than that. So thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell, and if you have any friends or anybody that might be interested, share the video, and I'm sure they'd enjoy it as well. Any of the tools I've been using, you can go through my Amazon affiliate at the link below. So I'll back this car out, and then we'll what was that? What in the world was that? Oh my God. Oh, this is the third guy this week. Oh man. What in the world am I going to do now?
Oh, Wizard, what did you do?
Man, you used to always pop up at the most inopportune times, don't you?
That's a talent.
A talent?
It's a talent.
This is like the third guy this week that has had an accident here at the shop.
Don't worry. Boys will have this taken care of. That thing they were bearing out at your place, the Hoovie's
His Range Rover?
Range Rover, yeah. Perfect place to dispose of this. No problem.
Oh, you're just going to put him in the Range Rover and we can
finish
finish
burying it up, no problem. Have my boys come clean this up for you here. So,
well, if you could do that, I'll make it worth your while.
well, of course. Yeah, you can stop making a habit of this.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go make some phone calls. We'll get this cleaned up for you in a jiffy.
Well, I sure appreciate it.
Well, no problem, man.
I'll put an ad out and see if I can get another guy in here this week.